30 minutes is a lot for your mother's back." That was my father's voice on the phone, flat and practical, like he was canceling lunch instead of telling me he and my mother weren't coming to my wedding. I was sitting at my desk in Iowa City, staring at a stack of admissions files, and for a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. 30 minutes? I said. He let out this tired little sigh. "Nancy, don't start. Don't start." Like I was the problem. Like I was making something difficult that should have been simple. 4 weeks earlier, my parents had boarded a plane and flown halfway across the country to Scottsdale for my sister Madison's housewarming party. 3.5 hours in the air, 10 days there. Photos every day. Smiling on a balcony. Smiling by a pool. Smiling in front of a kitchen bigger than my entire first apartment. But my wedding? The one happening 30 minutes from their house? Too far. I didn't cry while he was talking. I didn't raise my voice either. I just looked down at the seating chart spread across my desk and stared at the 2 names in the front row, like maybe if I kept looking long enough, they'd turn into different people. "Your mother's in pain," he said. I swallowed. "You flew to Arizona." That was different. I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, because it was so clean, so practiced, so perfectly absurd that it sounded rehearsed. Different. That word had been doing a lot of work in my family for most of my life. Madison needed more. Madison was more sensitive. Madison had bigger feelings. Madison needed support. Madison needed help. And me? I was always the one who could handle it. I was 35 years old when my father canceled on my wedding, but that feeling in my chest was much older than that. It had the shape of childhood. It had the weight of every time I was told to be understanding, to be mature, to not make things harder than they already were. My sister had been the sun in our house for as long as I could remember. Everybody else just learned how to orbit. The first time I understood that, I was 6. I had asked for a dollhouse for Christmas. Not anything huge, just one of those pretty little ones with tiny furniture and fake windows and stairs that made you bend down and imagine a whole life inside it. Christmas morning, there it was. Pink roof, green shutters, everything. For maybe 3 seconds, I thought it was mine. Then my mother lifted it out of the box and carried it into Madison's room. I still remember standing in the hallway in my socks, watching her set it down beside the crib. "You're a big girl now, Nancy," she said. "You understand these things better than a baby does." Madison was 1. She couldn't even walk yet. I got a coloring book and a smile that felt like a closed door. That dollhouse stayed in Madison's room for years. I never played with it. Nobody offered. Nobody explained it again. By then, I already understood the rule in our house. If something was unfair but benefited Madison, it was somehow still supposed to make sense. By high school, the difference wasn't subtle anymore. Madison got private school, small classes, expensive tuition, the kind of place with polished floors and uniforms and parents who talked about opportunity like they'd invented the word. I went to public school. When I asked why, my mother said, "Madison needs more attention." "You're smart, Nancy. You'll do fine anywhere." And I did do fine, because I had to. I worked part-time during school, picked up shifts on weekends, saved what I could, and learned early that praise and help were not the same thing. My parents had plenty of praise for my resilience. Help usually went somewhere else. By the time college came around, I didn't even know how to ask properly anymore. I got into the University of Iowa with a scholarship, and I still had to take on loans to make the numbers work. I filled out paperwork alone, figured out deadlines alone, learned the language of debt before I was old enough to rent a car. 2 years later, Madison got into the same university. My parents paid for everything: tuition, housing, books, spending money, even the extras. I remember one phone call during my junior year. There was a summer program I wanted to do overseas. I had already saved half of what I needed. I just needed a little help to close the gap. My father was quiet for a second. Then he said, "We're stretched thin right now. Madison needs a car for campus. That was how those conversations usually ended. Calmly, logically, in a tone that made selfishness sound responsible. So I borrowed more, worked more, slept less. Madison studied abroad in Italy. I graduated with honors and debt. She graduated with photos. My parents came to one of my graduation ceremonies years later, sat through the formal part, smiled for exactly long enough to say they had shown up. Then my mother checked the time and said they needed to leave because Madison needed help moving into a new apartment. I stood in the parking lot in my cap and gown and watched their car pull away before I had even found someone to take a picture. That kind of thing sounds dramatic when you say it out loud. It doesn't feel dramatic when you're living it. It feels normal. That's the worst part. You get used to disappointment when it arrives in familiar packaging. By the time I met Jamie, I had built a whole life around not expecting too much. We met at a community book club in the fall of 2022. He taught high school English, had student loans of his own, and listened in a way that made me realize how rarely I was really heard. On one of our first dates, he met my parents for dinner. Afterward, he waited until we got in the car and said, carefully, "Your parents seem distant." I remember gripping the seatbelt strap and looking out the window. "They're just like that," I said. But even as I said it, Madison's name lit up my mother's phone for the third time during dinner. My mother answered every call. My father barely looked up when I mentioned a promotion at work. When Madison texted the family group chat about patio furniture for her new place, my mother replied like the president had announced a national holiday. When I shared my engagement news, my mother answered hours later with one word: congratulations. Jamie noticed all of it. He also noticed something else. Every month, I sent my parents $400. "Why?" he asked me once. I gave him the answer I'd been giving myself for years. They need help. He looked at me for a long second, like he was trying to figure out how much truth I could handle at once. "Do they?" he said, "or do they just expect it?" I didn't answer him, not then, because there are some lies you don't realize you're living inside until somebody opens a window. In April of 2023, Madison got married. My parents contributed generously. They celebrated like royalty was entering the family. My mother changed dresses between the ceremony and the reception. There were endless photos, endless posts, endless pride pouring out of her like she had been personally crowned for raising that daughter. When Jaime and I got engaged the next year, my mother's first question wasn't when the wedding would be. It was whether Jaime had good insurance. That should have told me everything. Still, I kept going. Still, I mailed the invitations. Still, I put their names in the front row. Then in October of 2025, Madison and her husband bought a vacation condo in Scottsdale. My parents flew out for the housewarming and stayed over a week. My mother posted smiling captions every day about family time and how proud she was. My wedding invitation had already gone out by then. No one posted about that. A few days after they got back, my mother called to ask what time the ceremony was again. Then she asked if it was definitely in Iowa City. Then she said the drive felt long these days. I knew before my father officially canceled. I knew because some betrayals don't come out of nowhere. They walk toward you slowly, wearing shoes you recognize. And 3 weeks later, my father showed up at my office, carrying a folder that changed everything. By Tuesday, the pretending was over. My office was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the soft shuffle of papers on my desk. I was halfway through reviewing a financial aid file when my phone rang. My father. Not my cell, my work line. That alone made my stomach turn. I picked up and he got right to it. "We need to talk about Saturday." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for 1 second before answering. "What about Saturday?" A pause. Then the excuse came, neat and polished, like he and my mother had ironed it together. "Your mother's sciatica is bad. The doctor says she shouldn't be in a car that long." I looked out through my office window at the gray afternoon sky and felt something inside me go cold. "It's half an hour." With traffic, it's longer. There is no traffic from Cedar Rapids to Iowa City on a Saturday afternoon. His voice sharpened. Nancy, stop being difficult. That word, difficult. Like wanting your parents at your wedding was some kind of unreasonable demand. I tightened my hand around the phone. You were just on a plane to Arizona. Silence. Then. That wasn't the same. I let that sit there between us. Not the same. Of course not. Nothing involving Madison ever played by the same rules. Finally, I asked, very quietly, so you're really not coming? He exhaled, relieved that I'd said it for him. You'll be surrounded by people. Jamie's family will be there. Your mother's health has to come first. You understand? That was the part that almost broke me. Not the lie, not even the choice. The assumption that I would once again help them feel decent about it. I said, I understand perfectly. Then I hung up before my voice could give me away. For a long time, I just sat there with the phone still in my hand. Then I opened the seating chart for the last time and removed both of their names from the front row. I didn't fill the spaces. I left them empty on purpose. When I texted Jamie, he called right away. What happened? They're not coming. There was a beat of stunned silence. Nancy, I can't do this at work, I said. I'll tell you tonight. I finished helping a student after that, walked her through forms, deadlines, emergency aid options. I heard my own voice sounding calm and steady, and it felt like watching someone else perform me. Then I locked myself in a bathroom stall and cried so hard I had to press my fist against my mouth. The next day, my Uncle George called. Your father told me, he said, already angry. If I can drive in from 90 minutes away, they can manage 30. I'll be there. You don't have to take their seats, I said. I'm taking one of them anyway. And he did. So did Jaime's family, in every way that mattered. On the morning of the wedding, I kept checking my phone even though I already knew better. Jamie's sister was pinning my hair, while his mother moved around the room, making sure everybody had coffee, tissues, breakfast, safety pins. Real mother of the bride things. Things that should not have hit me as hard as they did. At 11:47, I checked one last time. Nothing. No text, no voicemail, no last-minute change of heart. I turned my phone off at noon. By the time I stepped into my dress, something in me had gone strangely still. Not healed, not calm, just finished waiting. At the church, Jaime's father knocked softly on the bridal room door. Nancy, he said, it would mean a lot to me to walk you in. I looked at him, and for a second I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. The chapel was nearly full when the doors opened. I took one breath, then another, and started down the aisle with his arms steady beneath my hand. And there they were. 2 empty seats in the front row, impossible to miss. I did not look away. I kept my eyes on those seats longer than I should have, long enough for it to feel intentional, long enough for everyone else to notice what I already knew. They weren't late. They just weren't coming. Jaime squeezed my hand when I reached him, like he could feel the exact moment something inside me shifted from hope into something quieter, heavier, final. The ceremony moved forward anyway. Vows were said. People smiled. There was laughter in the right places. For a few seconds at a time, I could almost forget the gap in the front row. Almost. But it was there in every photo angle, every glance, every pause where a mother or father would normally stand. At one point, the photographer leaned in and asked softly, "Do you want to wait a few minutes? In case they're on their way?" I shook my head. "No, they're not." She nodded, but her eyes lingered for just a second too long, like she didn't quite understand how that could be true. During the reception, people filled the space as best they could. Jamie's mom adjusted flowers to cover where my parents should have stood in the family photos. Uncle George stayed close, like he was guarding a spot that had already been abandoned. Friends told stories, raised glasses, made sure I was never alone for more than a few seconds. It helped, but it didn't erase anything. At one point, my college friend Bryce leaned over and asked, "Did they at least send something?" "A card?" I gave a small shake of my head. "Nothing yet." He didn't push. No one did. That was the strange part. Everyone saw it, but no one said it out loud. The absence was louder than anything anyone could have explained. Later, when the music slowed and it was time for the father-daughter dance, Jaime's dad stepped forward without hesitation. He held my hand gently, like I might break if he moved too fast. "You're not doing this alone," he said quietly. And I believed him. We danced and I cried, and he didn't try to stop me. He just stayed steady, like he had already decided I was his responsibility now. That should have felt comforting. It did. But it also made the empty space even more real. That night, we stayed at a small bed and breakfast. Everything was quiet, simple, calm in a way that felt almost unnatural after the day. Around 10, I turned my phone back on. I don't know why I expected anything different. No missed calls, no texts, no apologies. I stared at the screen for a long time, then locked it and set it face down on the nightstand. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not because things were okay. Because I had finally stopped waiting for them to be. The silence stretched into days, then weeks. "No, how was the wedding?" "No, we're sorry." Not even a delayed excuse. Just nothing. On November 28th, my sister finally texted, "Congrats on the wedding. Sorry we couldn't make it." I read it twice. There was something almost impressive about how she managed to make it sound like she had been expected to be there in the first place, like her absence carried the same weight. I didn't respond. A few days later, December 1st, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my banking app. $400. That was the amount I had sent my parents every single month for 10 years. No matter what. Even when my own bills were tight. Even when I had to choose between comfort and obligation. It had never been optional. Until that morning. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. Then I closed the app. I didn't send it. The absence of that payment sat in my account like something unfamiliar. Like a space that had always been occupied by something I didn't question. That evening, I told Jaime. "I didn't send it this month." He didn't look surprised. "How does that feel?" I thought about it. "Wrong," I said. Then after a pause, "But also, right." 4 days later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. My father. I let it play on speaker. "Hey, Nancy, it's Dad. I think there might have been a mix-up with the usual transfer this month. Just wanted to check in, make sure everything's okay. Give me a call when you get a chance." That was it. No mention of the wedding, no acknowledgement of anything, just the money. I replayed it once, then again. Each time it sounded exactly the same, like I hadn't just gotten married without them there, like nothing had changed at all. I deleted the message, and I didn't call back. A few days later, something did change. Not because they reached out, because someone else did. An estate attorney. The first sign that something was wrong was how hard my father tried to reach me. He called the office once and got blocked by my receptionist because I said I was busy. Then he called again. Then, a few days later, he showed up in person. Dolores buzzed my line and said, "Nancy, your dad is downstairs." I stared at my screen for a second too long. My dad? He says it's urgent. Of course it was. Men like my father only believed in urgency when it was happening to them. When I walked into the lobby, he was standing there with a bulky accordion folder clutched to his chest like it contained something alive. He looked thinner, more nervous than I had ever seen him. His mouth was set too tight. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Thanks for seeing me," he said. I didn't say I was happy to. I led him into a small glass-walled conference room. He sat down. I stayed standing. He started with the usual weak attempt. "I know you're upset about the wedding." "No," I cut in. You don't get to start there. Why are you here? His fingers fumbled with the clasp on the folder. This is about your great-aunt Helen's estate. That made me stop. My great-aunt Helen had died in October. I knew that much because I had seen the notice myself, not because anyone in my family had bothered to tell me. He slid a letter across the table. An attorney in Iowa City was handling the estate. Helen had left money to be divided between Madison and me. And during the routine estate review, another account had surfaced, an old custodial education account with my name attached to it. I looked up slowly. What account? He didn't answer right away. That was when I knew whatever came next was going to be bad. He pushed over another document, then another. I picked them up and read the lines twice before they made sense. My grandmother had created an education fund for me when I was a child. For me. Not for both of us. Not for the family. For me. $150,000. I actually laughed once. A small, ugly sound. That's impossible. My father kept his eyes on the table. It was meant for your schooling. The room went very still. I took out loans, I said. He nodded once. I felt something cold move through my whole body. Where did the money go? Nancy, where? He opened the folder. What came out next wasn't an explanation. It was a confession disguised as paperwork. Bank statements, withdrawal records, dates, amounts. I sat down without meaning to. I started matching the years in my head. Private school tuition, study abroad, college expenses. Not mine. Madison's. Every page made it worse. Every line item tightened something in my chest until I could barely breathe. While I had been filling out aid forms and working jobs and borrowing money I would spend years trying to repay, they had been draining an account created in my name and using it to fund my sister's life. I looked up at him. You used my college fund on Madison. His face shifted into that expression I'd hated since childhood. That calm, exhausted look adults use when they want to make betrayal sound practical. We had to make decisions for the family. I stared at him. No, I said. You made decisions for her. He tried to soften it. You were always capable. You had scholarships. You were doing well. That hit me harder than the theft. Not because it was new, because it was the same excuse. The same one. My whole life. You're strong. You'll manage. You don't need what she needs. I put one of the statements flat on the table between us. This had my name on it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached into the folder again and pulled out one final document. Fresh paper, clean print, prepared for my signature. I read it once. Then again. It was a release, a statement saying I had received the funds intended for me and that everything had been handled properly. For a second, I genuinely thought I might be sick. You came here, I said slowly, to get me to sign a lie. His voice dropped. It'll keep the estate from getting complicated. For who? He hesitated. That was answer enough. Madison's portion could be delayed, he said. She's counting on that money. I just looked at him. He had not come to apologize for missing my wedding. He had not come because guilt finally found him. He had come because he needed me useful one more time. He had taken money my grandmother set aside to protect me, watched me drown in debt, skipped the biggest day of my life, and now he was asking me to clean up the paperwork so my sister could keep getting paid. Get out, I said. Nancy, be reasonable. Get out. He stood up, startled by the way I said it. Then he did the stupidest thing he could have done. In his panic, he left the folder behind. He made it all the way to the door before realizing, but by then I already had my hand on it. Leave, I said again. He left. I stood alone in that conference room, listening to the door shut behind him, and stared down at the evidence of my entire life spread out in front of me. Then I found an old sealed envelope tucked at the very bottom. And on the front, In shaky handwriting was my name. My fingers hovered over the envelope for a long time before I opened it. The paper was thin, slightly yellowed, like it had been waiting years for me to finally see it. I slid it out carefully. The handwriting was unmistakable, uneven, a little shaky but deliberate. My grandmother. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until halfway through the first paragraph. She had seen it. All of it. Not guessed, not suspected. Seen. The way my mother looked at Madison. The way I learned to stay quiet. The way things that were supposed to be mine quietly shifted. There was a line that made my chest tighten so hard I had to stop reading. You are not less. You were simply not chosen. I closed my eyes. For a second, I wasn't in that conference room anymore. I was 6 again, standing in a hallway, watching something meant for me disappear into someone else's life. But this time, someone had noticed, someone had named it, and someone had tried to protect me. I kept reading. The money, every dollar of it, was meant to give me a way out, a chance to build something without drowning in debt. She had known my parents would be in control of it, and she had still trusted them to do the right thing. And then, near the end, if they take this from you, fight. I read that line 3 times. Fight. Not accept, not understand, not be the bigger person. Fight. I didn't realize I was crying until a drop hit the page. By the time I finished, my hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. That was new. Dolores knocked softly and cracked the door open. Honey, are you okay? I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. No, I said. Then after a beat, but I'm going to be. That night, Jaime sat beside me on the couch while I spread everything out across the coffee table. The statements, the trust documents, the letter. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me, just read. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. This isn't just messed up, he said quietly. This is illegal. I let out a slow breath. I know. No, I mean legally. They had a responsibility to that account. They weren't allowed to use it like that. I nodded. He glanced at the unsigned paper my father had left behind. And he wanted you to sign this? Yes. To say you got the money? Yes. Jaime leaned back, running a hand over his face. Good thing you didn't. I looked at him. I'm not signing anything. Good, he said. Because we're getting a lawyer. The next morning, I sat across from a woman named Charlotte Price, and for the first time, someone explained it to me in terms that didn't bend or soften around family. They had a duty to you, she said. They broke it. Simple, clear, no excuses. No different, no you'll understand. Just the truth. What happens now? I asked. She didn't hesitate. We make them pay it back. That same week, statements were gathered, witnesses were contacted, and everything my parents had tried to blur into something vague and justifiable was turned into something precise, documented, traceable, undeniable. By the time the demand letter went out, it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction. 3 days later, my phone rang. My mother. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. How could you do this to us? She said immediately. No hello, no hesitation, just accusation. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly very calm. You mean ask for what was mine? Her voice sharpened. We could lose everything, Nancy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. She didn't hang up right away. You're being selfish, my mother said, her voice tight, controlled, like she was trying to keep things from spilling over. After everything we've done for you. I almost asked her what that was. Almost. Instead, I said, talk to my lawyer. Then I ended the call. The next few days were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just different. Like something that had been loud in my life for years had finally been turned off. Madison called after that. Her tone was softer, but the message was the same. "This is too much, Nancy. You're going to destroy everything." I stood by the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. "Everything?" I repeated. "Our family." I let that word sit there for a second. Family. The same word that had been used to explain everything I was supposed to accept. I exhaled slowly. That was already broken. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. She went quiet after that. Then, almost under her breath, she said something that landed harder than anything else. "This is why they always liked me more." No denial, no apology. Just the truth, finally said out loud. I didn't argue. "I know," I said, and I hung up. After that, things moved fast. Their lawyer reached out. The evidence was clear. The numbers didn't lie. There wasn't much room to fight. We settled. They agreed to return the money, with interest. To do it, they had to sell the house I grew up in. The one they had protected, prioritized, and used as proof that everything they did was for the family. That house. Gone. The first check arrived on a gray morning. I held it in my hands longer than I expected to. Not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. For the first time, something that was meant for me had actually made it back to me. That afternoon, I sat at my laptop and opened my student loan account. The balance stared back at me. Years of payments, years of stress, years of choosing between survival and obligation. Jamie stood behind me, one hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. Then I clicked. The number dropped to 0, just like that. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the screen, waiting for it to feel real. "It's gone," I said. Jamie smiled. "Yeah, it is." We paid off his loans too, not because we had to, because we could. A few weeks later, we stood in front of a small house with a porch and chipped paint, and sunlight hitting the windows just right. "This one," I said. He looked at me. "You sure?" I nodded. For the first time, I wasn't choosing something based on what I could survive. I was choosing something because I wanted it. We bought it. No one else's opinion, no conditions, no quiet trade-offs, just ours. The second check came with a small box. Inside was my grandmother's ring. Simple, silver, a deep purple stone that caught the light when I turned my hand. I slipped it on, and it fit like it had been waiting. That night, we had dinner with the people who had actually shown up. Jaime's parents, his sister, my uncle, a few friends. Nothing fancy, just food, conversation, warmth. At one point, someone raised a glass and said, "To family." And this time, the word didn't feel like something I owed. It felt like something I chose. I haven't spoken to my parents since the settlement. Not out of anger, just clarity. Some things don't need another conversation. They need distance. Sometimes I think about those 2 empty seats. Not the way I used to, not with that ache. Now they feel like proof, not of what I lost, but of what I stopped waiting for. Because the truth is, they spent my future on the daughter they chose. And I built a better one without them. What would you have done in my place?